We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land of which we record this podcast, the Whadjuk people of Nungabuja. We recognise their continued connection to the land and waters of this beautiful place and acknowledge that this land has never been ceded.
Step into the realm of daring ideas and transformative dialogues. This is Voices from the Edge, the podcast that pushes boundaries and ventures beyond the ordinary. Here, we confront the crucial issues that shape our world today. From the heartbeat of community challenges to the untold chronicles of leadership. From the relentless pursuit of social justice to the essential lessons in safety and lifelong learning. Voices from the Edge takes you to the crossroads of change. Because the edge is not just a boundary, it's where growth happens. It's where the real conversations begin. So lean in, be inspired, and let's explore what lies beyond the edge.
And joining us today is the amazing Nathalie Martinek.
Nathalie Martinek, PhD, helps people build relational leadership capacity and cultivate effective relationships in professional life, while also supporting those who've been scapegoated, sidelined, or harmed in environments that protect image over people. As a coach, she works with professionals to shift unhelpful relational patterns and navigate subtle power dynamics. As a group facilitator, she creates spaces for learning, applied reflection, and restoration. As a consultant, she helps individuals make sense of workplace dysfunction and emerge intact, with insight into the system and how to move forward. Her approach draws on years of practice inside and alongside institutions, informed by an early career in developmental biology and cancer research, where she studied how environments shape behavior and how systems enable dysfunction. Nathalie writes and teaches on scapegoating, narcissistic systems, relational leadership, and the emotional forces that shape them. She is the author of The Little Book of Assertiveness, The Scapegoating Playbook at Work, and creator of Hacking Narcissism on Substack.
I'm well, thanks, Tom.
And where are you joining us from today?
I'm joining you from now sunny Melbourne, Australia.
How long will that last? About an hour and a half?
Maybe 10 minutes.
Oh, dear. I do love Melbourne. You are in the privileged position of having some really good coffee vendors and some lovely chocolatiers, but I'm not allowed to visit them anymore because I may have eaten too many.
Oh,
in
same.
years.
New addiction that Melbourne catered.
What is Melbourne for its little lanes? It's little trendy lanes, I guess they call.
Yeah, they're gorgeous. I mean, you've got all the street art, you've got the hidden nameless cafes. It's,
Yes.
always discovering something new when you venture out. Yeah.
Very good. Now, Lee, I brought you on today because you came to my attention through what I believe is the most successful that I've seen series of posts and articles about a topic, and it just seemed to be ongoing and it built and built and built. And this was on scapegoating in the workplace. First of all, was it planned? And were you surprised at the response that you got?
Yeah, good question. I'm asked this a lot. It wasn't planned. I had no idea that there would be such an appetite for such a topic. And I had been pretty surprised at the reception and the interest. And, this is on one social media platform. And we know how these platforms work. Everyone's looking for the next big thing, the next trendy thing. So whenever there's a new word to describe people's pain and suffering, and even though it's not a new word, but a new way of looking at things and their experience, people jump on it, not surprisingly. So I think that's kind of what happened.
What drew your attention to focus on this specific workplace issue?
Yeah, well, it's because I've experienced it in a number of ways, and not just in workplaces, in different groups throughout my life, being the target of it or witnessing it. And so it was a recent experience of having witnessed it, but also been part of a team that was scapegoated. So I just started putting my thoughts on it together and then putting it out there lo and behold, there's lots of interest and attention. Because when we think about workplace abuse situations, bullying is often what comes to mind. Scapegoating can have elements of bullying, but it's often nuanced, and we miss that it's not just one person targeting another person. It's a system turning on one person, and it does it progressively, increasing the number of people who turn against the target to exile them from a system. I love challenging dominant narratives about things like moral injury or burnout or pain and suffering, things that describe our pain and suffering. And scapegoating was another one that wanted to raise awareness, but also challenge. I'm more of a disruptor in that way, challenge the common thoughts and dominant narratives about workplace abuse and bullying and this general negativity that we experience.
You talked about bullying and harassment and being more of an individualized behavior, whereas scapegoating is more of a collective turning on individuals or groups.
Mm-hmm.
How frequent, in at least your opinion, do you think this actually happens in workplaces?
Well, I don't have any stats to share with you, but having observed over the years of my professional life that it's happened in every single place I've been in. Either I'm the common denominator and contributing or causing, or this is actually an institutional reflex in order to shield themselves from any accountability. So I've seen it happen to people at the highest levels of management or leadership to the lowest on the sort of hierarchical ladder. No one escapes it. It can happen to anyone. Anyone can be turned on at any time in any place because it is driven by unconsciously by emotions, and emotions such as shame, envy, contempt, and package in that is insecurity, inadequacy, many different things. None of us are immune to these emotions, and our response to them determine whether or not we're going to blame somebody for how we feel or take responsibility for the things that are going on and work to resolve them. A marker of maturity. If you have mature leadership, mature organizations who are willing to take accountability or at least contribute to a solution that is beneficial overall, you're less likely to get the scapegoating. And it requires a number of conditions for that to be in place. Whereas scapegoating happens where there's lower trust, higher pressure, egos driving, certain agendas, those who have influence and power, decision-making power, they tend to have more say, they have more authority. And so they can influence narratives about individuals and lead to others turning on that individual, even if they don't even fully believe the narrative. They just do it to stay safe. So it is a complex interaction of culture and people that's always fascinating to me, that you can have reasonable people in an environment act one way and act totally differently in another. The difference is a lower or higher trust in either of those contexts.
Okay. What do you think it's so hard for some organizations to recognize that scapegoating is actually occurring within their workplace? Firstly, I probably should say, is it that organizations don't recognize it, or is it that they choose not to address it?
I don't think it's been a term that's been popularized the way burnout has and workplace wellness. So I think because it's not a reaction that occurs quickly and then the scapegoating and the exile happens immediately. It might look that way to the one who is being exiled because they didn't see the different stages of the process already occurring. So I don't think most institutions are aware of what they're doing. You would need somebody who is more of a Machiavellian, cunning, calculating person in charge of these things to go, we're going to blame that person for this screw up. So, we shield ourselves. I don't think that's as common as what I've been talking about, which is an unconscious reaction. So if you were to say to, a leader that I think what you're doing is scapegoating so-and-so, because for a number of reasons, I just don't think people see it, because no one wants to ever believe that they're the perpetrator of wrongdoing, and scapegoating doesn't carry a positive tone with it.
Does scapegoating actually serve a purpose in meeting individuals or teams or organizations' psychological needs?
Well, I guess maybe it helps to define what scapegoating is. And so scapegoating is a very ancient process that was described in the Jewish scriptures, in the Torah or Old Testament for everyone else who know it. And basically it's using a goat to carry the sins of a community, and then they banish it to the wilderness so it can carry the sins away, and then the community is cleansed, is purified. So it's a purification ritual. But that's essentially what happens in workplaces or in any sort of groups, where instead of dealing with our failures or our faults or taking even a look at them, we'd rather just project them onto another object or person and send them out. And therefore, we'll feel better because they're the problem, and now the problem's gone, everything's fixed. But that's never the case, because for the tendency to scapegoat high-performing, highly competent targets actually takes the talent out of the pool. And if they've been carrying a lot of the load, the rest of the team feel it when that person is gone. And things are never quite the same. But nobody talks about it. No one admits it openly. So it's a cycle that will continue to operate in the same way, because no one's taken a look at themselves and said, we need to stop doing stuff like this. We need to stop shunning or projecting our problems onto one person.
Is scapegoating basically a reinforcing of the status quo within an organization?
Yeah, I would say so. Because so there's so many organizations who say we want change, we want to innovate. But in order to do that, you have to change things, and that is uncomfortable. So when you have somebody who comes in or who's been there and says, this is not working, there are some risks associated with doing things the same way, we need to create change. Everyone needs to be on board with that to actually go, yes, we'll all work together to support this change. And it's going to be uncomfortable, but we'll ride it out. Whereas a lot of people, even if you raise the issue, they don't see it as an issue because they're happy with the way things are because it's working for them. And so you start to be seen as a problem. So you're essentially being the disruptor of status quo. So in order to get rid of the disruptor and protect the status quo, we need to kind of fabricate this whole situation and performance manage them and make claims about their performance that are not actually true, but we're going to believe them because that's what we need to, again, preserve this thing that we think is more important than that person.
Yeah. I like the way you've mentioned in a few of your posts about we usually take the individual's strengths that were deemed to be strengths and positives. We just reframe the narrative, and those characteristics that were exemplified or cherished now become the things that are negative about the people. And so, instead of being an agent for change, you're now the problem, you're not a team player, etc. Do you find that the narrative construct around the person who's therefore deemed to be the scapegoat or the problem, how subtly it changes in such a short period of time?
Yeah, it is. And that nobody there are people who'll think, well, that's weird because we've just been praising them. And now the thing we've been praising them for is a problem to that person. But, people standing up. A lot of people don't question, especially in Australian culture. It's what I've noticed as a Canadian living here for 20 years now. People don't necessarily speak up and say the thing that bothers them in the moment. They keep quiet because they don't want to ruffle feathers or be seen as a problem and stew on it for a while. And they might say their feelings to someone else, but it doesn't ever come out publicly. And so nobody does anything about it. So even though there's some early warning signs that this person is now being targeted or about to be targeted because the things that we praise them for are now seen as problems, but none of us are prepared to stand up because, that's not our business. Or I don't know what to say, or it's not obvious they're being targeted. It's a lot of discomfort. And that's how scapegoating really, I guess, is sustained, because we just sit in the discomfort and feel powerless to do anything, or we just stay in the silence of it. even though we feel things are going on, we might not have language to describe the discomfort and why we feel it. It thrives on this uncertainty versus being yelled at by a boss in front of everyone. It's very clear that's so inappropriate and that's abusive. And, you can do something about it. Whereas all the other things where the language can be a little vague or ambiguous, people get away with that.
Yeah, yeah. What are some of the negative effects of scapegoating on a business? But I'm guessing it would actually impact on productivity regardless anyhow.
Yeah. Well, if you have somebody who's been a high performer, who's had strong influence, not only in that workplace, but, among stakeholders externally, you remove them or they remove themselves because, something's going to happen. Then there's a void that gets created in their absence. So the things that they were doing now have to be handed over and managed by everyone else. But you're lacking potentially the talent that that person brought and the wisdom and knowledge. So there's going to be some recovery time. Then you have to spend on recruiting to replace that person to come in and then acclimatize to a role that was filled by somebody else. So there's the time lag and so the requirement for everyone else to pick up slack. So that leads to resentments. The whole process when you see somebody picked on but nobody's doing anything about it, it has a demoralizing effect. So when that person leaves, the rest of the crew would still feel demoralized. They might not feel as motivated to work. So there's going to be a lag potentially of productivity, or they get on with things, but they're changed from that experience. And so they might get stuff done, but they might also be looking for new jobs.
I'm just wondering, how long after someone who's been scapegoated leaves the organization, either voluntary or... Do we still go on blaming that person for in the future, looking backwards and saying, these issues that we have now, they were all their fault? Does that go on for years or does it just short period of time?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it depends on how that person contributed to the functioning of the team or the organization. Once the scapegoat leaves, however they leave, forcibly or voluntarily, they're still under surveillance. They're still being watched and seeing what they're going to put up on social media and who they're talking to. So it's not uncommon for the scapegoated to lose credibility and have a harder time getting jobs in that same industry because people have been talking to, they anticipate what the scapegoat might say about the old organization to new organizations. So they get in there and already start to control the narrative. So it can be detrimental to not just being scapegoated at work, but after it just follows them along. They can't they can't shed that role. They're still in it. Whereas other people, there's a relief in the organization, that person's out and they move on and they don't talk about them anymore. It's like they never existed. So they're erased.
Yeah. From your experience and from talking to people, how does scapegoating impact the mental health of the person who is scapegoated?
Well, it's a good question because if you've ever gone through it, it's not clear what's happening for some people who don't know about scapegoating or what it looks like or feels like. It's a very confusing time because one moment they're praised, another moment they're devalued and shunned. People are treating them differently, so they feel like they've done something wrong. So they own the blame and shame that's actually being cast onto them. And it's very isolating, alienating. It would be awful for many people who came in feeling good and now feeling crappy, but they don't know what's changed. They don't have any information about anything until they get the performance management talk or the feedback that is saying you're too much of this or not enough of this. So vague, nonspecific. So it's very confusing for people who are going through it. And it's also upsetting because it's so isolating because they're the people who said they'd support you or you thought they would support you aren't really there.
Is there a difference between how scapegoating plays out in smaller organizations as opposed to very large organizations?
I think it happens in small and large organizations. So again, size doesn't make anyone immune to the scapegoating process because if you have one person who has some level of authority over how things run, and they're sort of insecure, fragile leader, they can create all the stories they want unless you have other people in the group who are very strong and see what's going on and kind of work together to try to resolve it or push back against that leader. Because if more people stood up to that one person has less power unless they choose to fire everyone and then just rehire new. We hear stuff like that, but it's not as common because you don't want to lose your workforce. So it's the lack of people standing up collectively and pushing back against these narratives that is what allows the scapegoating process to unfold. No place is immune to it.
Yeah. Does gender, culture, influence of individuals within the organization basically decide who's going to become the scapegoat?
That's a good question. It's hard to say because, again, it's not a person choosing a scapegoat. It's a reaction to somebody's appearance, performance, competence. What can happen is you have an existing team, somebody new comes in and has more authority. They feel threatened by the person. That's who gets scapegoated. It's more about the insecurity of people with a level of authority that initiate the scapegoating process, the playbook, against somebody who they feel threatened by or inferior to or inadequate relative to. It's an immature reaction to feeling insecure. And that's the kind of absurdity of this whole thing.
Yeah. And you do workplace coaching and leadership and dynamics coaching. How do you help leaders spot scapegoating within their organization and maybe help dismantle the patterns that support it?
I work with individuals who are working in organizations who are often on the receiving end of the scapegoating rather than those who are choosing to learn more about it and wanting to be able to stop it. Because when you're in a hierarchy, it doesn't matter where you are in it. There's always someone higher than you. Even people in board of directors, there's scapegoating within the board to eject somebody out of the board. It doesn't really matter if you at a certain level can see it. You have control over it on your little team. But if it's happening across rungs in the hierarchy, it's very difficult to do anything about it because you're dealing with relationships that exist across a hierarchy. And if you have a leader who is very good politically, but not necessarily functionally as a worker, they get away with everything because they have these good relationships. If they're accused of bullying or mistreatment or even scapegoating, no one around them is going to believe it. Right? That's what you're dealing with, these defenses all around, these protections. So it is a difficult thing to manage. Teach people who don't think that scapegoating is a thing or that they could be capable of scapegoating somebody versus those who are on the receiving end and never want to treat anyone like that as they move forward.
Good. Do you have any strategies for those who suspect they are being scapegoated, particularly if the leadership are part of the problem?
Yeah. So once you're in the process of scapegoating, there's no breaks to the system, to the process. So it is often a signal that it's time to start looking to move on. So what I help people with often is how to buy time before they leave. So leaving is inevitable, but how to kind of suspend their time there a little longer. So how to understand where they are in the scapegoating process. I've outlined 8 stages. So identifying the stage and what happens in that stage and how to outsmart it because you know what's coming next. So how to outsmart it, how to sometimes reduce your threat factor, because if you're seen as a threat because you keep challenging or standing up, then maybe if you're trying to buy time, don't do that so much or do it at all, because why are you bothering to challenge things when the institution maybe minimize your threat factor so that they take the heat off you a little bit? So those are a few strategies that I recommend to people. Again, it's dependent on their situation. We have to unpack and analyze what's going on, but those are some basics. If you're the threat, then reduce your threat factor through a number of different ways. Try to stay under the radar a little bit so that they take the heat off you a little bit. And also don't fall for the tricks that they're going to be pulling on you, which is trying to convince you that you're a problem, that you need to be performance managed, that you have to sign an NDA. Once they've changed the narrative of what's going on, you can refuse all those things. Or you could just go, that's nice. I'm just going to keep doing my work. You know you're leaving.
Okay. I'm guessing those lovely strategies would be in the lovely ebook you've put out, which is the Skateboarding Playbook at Work.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's hard to compile enough evidence that would be seen as, helpful legally if you wanted to take it down that direction. So sometimes it's better to just be aware of what's happening, maybe predict the next moves and adjust your behavior responses accordingly.
Just from what I've heard and maybe seen in the workplace, is it true that once scapegoating starts, it just continues to escalate until there's an inevitable conclusion?
Yeah, it's like a runaway train. The only way it can be stopped is if there is another layer of protection above you that sees through all of it and has the authority to stop it. Even if you bring in those authorities and say there's workplace investigations and there's findings that there is actually problems, there's also cover-ups. They don't always implement the recommended strategies to deal with the situation, or they use other methods that continue to demonize the target instead of support them. You need good protections around you. You need to be somebody who makes the institution look good, and they really need you, and then they'll protect you, at least temporarily, until they get what they need from you. These places where we spend so much of our time and give so much of our energy, but unfortunately, it's a reality for so many people. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here talking about it today.
Yeah, absolutely. In your opinion, remote or hybrid work, does this actually reduce the chance of scapegoating, or does it exacerbate the possibility?
That is a really good question. I can't give a clear answer on that one. It's hard to say. Again, it depends on the organization. I've seen it happen to people who are entirely remote. I've seen it happen entirely in person or hybrid, doesn't matter. It happens in all instances, but I don't know about the prevalence of one context or another.
Okay. Now, you talked about coming from lovely Canada. You talked about some of the Australian characteristics about not speaking up. Does scapegoating evolve in your opinion, is it there different characteristics of scapegoating in Canada than there is Australia, or is it just the same with a different flavour?
It's an interesting question because one of the drivers of scapegoating is envy. We know in Australia, New Zealand, and I think England, the tall poppy syndrome, which is entirely envy-based. People get elevated by an authority. They're anointed to be the important one and get a lot of attention. And as soon as they do something that shame to the authority that elevated them or secondhand embarrassment, then they can be cut down. In their day-to-day workplaces, there can be favorites. The favorite might be stepping on toes of existing relationships. And so somebody would feel envious of that favorite person and will do something to try to cut them down into not favorite so that they can become elevated as favorite. And that's not a rational thing. It's driven by envy, because envy is, I want what you have and I no longer want you to have it. Your presence is threatening my status. So I'm going to do something to try to cut you down, or I can justify things to cut you down the institution or to save the hierarchy. Yeah, it's a complex emotion. The way we react to it we don't have to respond to it in that way, but I think that's one of the drivers. If you think about Australia and tall poppy syndrome, that would be something that would operate here. Not to say it doesn't operate anywhere else, but we know about tall poppy syndrome here.
You've written a couple of other books that I was unaware of. The Little Book of Assertiveness, and there's one here called Knowledge Vampirism, if I've pronounced that correctly. I'm really curious about that one. What's that one about?
Well, it's not a book. It's a concept I came up with a few years ago because it kept happening to me. And it's knowledge vampirism, and it fills in sort of the gray that exists between knowledge theft, like intellectual property theft, and plagiarism. So it's not quite plagiarism. It's not like obvious theft. Somewhere in the middle that occurs between two people, one who has like an unpublished knowledge base, and they have a collaboration or a partnership or a friendship. That other person slowly extracts your knowledge by asking you questions and showing curiosity. And throughout time, they basically absorb your knowledge base. And then they start to teach it back to you as if they were always the author of it. And they twist the narrative a little bit about it so that they could come across as the original authors and they know better and they're teaching you. And then they say, this is my stuff, you can't use it. And then they publish books with their name on it, but it's your stuff. And it's very common. I know doctoral students who had their entire thesis taken from them by a supervisor or another person. It is rampant everywhere. I know it's in tech. I know it's in the arts. Because in so many environments, it's expected that we'll share knowledge and ideas. Knowledge is free, but I disagree with that. Information might be free. It's the information you put out willingly or is out there. And it's not just ideas, it's a body of knowledge. So it's not just like one bit of information, it's this whole thing. So, and I also describe it as a feature of covert narcissism. So one person is the narcissistic, kind of self-serving, dominating. It's all about me. It's all about what I want, what I think is important, what matters. And you serve me. You're not, I'm giving you my attention. In exchange for my attention, you're providing me with the information I want. But you got something out of it because I gave you attention. That's how some of them think. And so through this process of gaining your trust, they start to extract your knowledge by asking lots of questions. And if you're a person who loves to share knowledge, like I do, then they just kind of create their little archive of your work in their mind, but they believe it was theirs all along. And again, it's not a deliberate, conscious thing. It's just how some people have learned to survive and have the next big thing. They just find somebody who's got the thing they're interested in that they want to, be known for.
Yeah, yeah.
Have you encountered this?
Oh, just a little bit. I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen an awful lot. Where you start with a concept and all of a sudden it becomes someone else's concept and then you just look at you almost want to roll your eyes. I've never had it where it's something where I've put monetary value on it, but yeah.
Yeah. Or if knowledge is free, why are we funding so much scientific research? And then you have to pay to subscribe to some journals to get access to the findings. Like, it's not free.
Sure. Companies.
Yeah, it's not free. It's free if you make it free, and that's your choice.
That's right.
We also need to pay to live. So, yeah.
So, see, to me, that's just pure theft. It's just theft of something physical, but this is a theft of knowledge, or an idea or a concept. So, yeah. All right. Is there anything you could give leaders advice that they could take action on so that their organization does not normalize scapegoating?
Leaders have a huge responsibility regarding not scapegoating. And part of it lies in their own ego management. Because as much as we like to think leaders are well developed in their character and their maturity, many are elevated into positions of leadership without that development, without that maturity. So those who don't have it, who feel a little bit uncomfortable with feedback and don't know how to deal with it when it's feedback that doesn't fit their ideal image of themselves, inadvertently, you will want to lash out at that person who gave you the feedback. So it does require some strong ego management on everyone's part, but especially leaders, because you're modeling the type of culture that you are permitting. And
Excellent.
so
All right.
learning to refine ones
Nathalie
we go
Martinek, we
and
might
the
actually
responses
have to
to
leave it there.
things.
So thank you very much for your time.
No, got cut off there.
We're up to about
What a
lead-
leader. Yeah.
Yeah. You say whatever you like now about leadership, and I can edit it in.
Oh, there's another.
Yeah. Or we might even just cut that last question.
Refine egos.
Thank you so much for your time. Yeah.
Pleasure.
Stop recording now because, all right, I'm going to say it again. I'll say that the farewell bit because I'm still talking when I'm recording, which is not great.
Mm,
Nathalie Martinek, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you today.
great.
Thanks for listening to Voices from the Edge. If you like what we are doing, like the episode in the podcast, subscribe so you won't miss any future episodes and leave a positive review.